At a time, the continent grapples with a wide range of issues, including a rise in coronavirus infections, border disputes and displacement due to fighting. At this year's virtual summit, Felix Tshisekedi, the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, took over the rotating AU chairmanship from his South African counterpart, Cyril Ramaphosa. The Pan-African Body's Assembly also elected high-level officials to lead the AU Commission, including a chairperson for the next 4 years. We now want to have that discussion, and joining me is Abel Oyeyo, who is a regional affairs commentator. Thank you very much for joining us here on Bottom Line Africa. I'll just start with the agenda of the chairperson of the African Union for 2021, that is President Felix Tshisekedi. Climate change, fighting sexual violence, promoting the African continental free trade area, and accelerating Grand Inga hydropower project. What do you think as his agenda? What do you think about this?
Well, I think, thank you so much for inviting me here. I think it's quite absurd that at a time when the continent is suffering, struggling with COVID-19, you can actually come up with very relevant objectives. I expected him to walk in the path of Ramaphosa and try to make sure that the continent has the resources it requires to deal with COVID-19. But as you listed, he talks about climate change, he talks about fighting against sexual violence, he talks about the continental free trade area, he talks about the hydropower project in DRC. So nowhere does he mention the pandemic that is currently ravaging our countries and in the entire continent. So in as much as his objectives sound so lofty and exciting, they are not timely.
All right,
Yes.
and I like the fact that you've talked about timeliness. I want us to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic that has affected Africa in so many ways. And what seems to be the problem is funding, especially for vaccination. Most people are saying the Western countries, that is Western continents, are sort of holding the vaccination of COVID-19. It will take around 3 years for African countries to get these vaccines. What do you think about this, and what role is AU supposed to play to ensure that African countries get vaccinated?
I think what the EU needs to do is to get its priorities right. And the outgoing chairman, that is the president of South Africa, actually had its priorities set out in the right manner. And if we can project that it's only after 3 years that African countries can be able to get what we call reasonable vaccination of its people, then I don't think the current chairman, who is the president of DRC, has any reason talking about climate change and things like, the continental free trade area. He needs to focus strongly so that we get to reduce the amount of time we're going to take to avail the vaccine to our people. Now, we have a problem with funding, for us to be able to procure the right amount of doses for the vaccine. We have to have money. And of course, African countries are used to begging, and COVID-19 comes at a time when the global economy is suffering. So you cannot expect the kind of support you've always gotten from outside to be given, to be extended to us. Well, it can be there, but not to the same level we used to getting. So countries in the Western world want to make sure they can access those vaccines and they keep them for their people. So, and the sun has to shine on those who are standing before it can shine on those who are kneeling. So they have to make sure the populations are well vaccinated before they can be able to donate to African countries which are always begging. And there's what we call the participation in the process of development of the vaccine itself, clinical trials and all that. African countries have not played an instrumental role in all this. We used to remaining behind and letting the rest of the world, make the vital steps. So there's no way we can expect to be given priority when it comes to getting the vaccines if we have not played any instrumental role in the process of developing the vaccine. If we had our own,
Yes.
local solution, we couldn't be waiting for the Western world to give us their own vaccines. We could actually be ahead in giving these vaccines to our people. Now, because we are always begging and looking out to the Western world for help and direction, we have to wait for 3 years for us to get this vaccine for our people, which is quite unfortunate.
Well, the same president, that is Cyril Ramaphosa, South African president, did mention over the weekend that access to loans on favorable terms will be crucial to Africa's economic recovery. And we've seen significant assistance from IMF, World Bank. But he says there's more that needs to be done. What more can be done?
Obviously, more, when he talks about more, means continued borrowing. And that is because of the problem of corruption. African countries have been blessed with tremendous amounts of resources. But what we do is to purloin, to steal the resources and bank them. You know, the Western world, of course, where, you know, these resources, they don't get to be used for anything. So we have to keep on begging time and time again to be able to deal with the problems we have. And it's going to be very tough in the post-COVID-19 period when most of these African economies will be crushed. So they'll need a lot of support to get past that. And the tradition or the culture of borrowing from the International Monetary Fund and the other, institutions at some point will become a problem. You remember in Kenya in 1991, 1992, all the way to around 2000, Kenya was actually blocked from borrowing from these institutions during Moi's presidency. And we struggled a lot. The economy crashed. So most African countries will find themselves in a similar situation whereby you've exhausted all the avenues of borrowing because of corruption. Like you saw what happened in Kenya. Under President Uhuru Kenyatta, we borrowed so much money, and this money was stolen in the famous, KEMSA scandal. So this money was not even used for what it was intended. So we're still in a hole. We have to pay back the money, and it was not even used for what it was meant for. So most African countries have this same problem of corruption, which now sends them back with the begging bowl.
But then isn't a bloc like African Union supposed to be corruption-free?
That is what you'd expect, but for the longest time, corruption has been equivalent to Africa. When you talk about corruption, you talk about Africa, because I don't know whether it's a cultural problem we have, and I'm not saying it's only in Kenya it's only in Africa where you find corruption. It's only that it's found in higher, levels. So the AU should be able to lead from the front in terms of tackling issues such as corruption. But then again, from the time it was, of course, reconfigured from OAU to AU, we've seen what we call continued missteps. They've always gotten their priorities wrong. They've always forgotten, the basic idea why the organization exists. That is why we cannot solve conflicts, effectively. That's why we don't have an effective continental, military force to help in resolving these African conflicts. That is why when we have an issue like COVID-19, we have to look outward instead of inward. People have always complained. The richest continent in the world is always looking outward for help. Nowhere in the world you can find the kind of resources Africa as a continent has. Like, we have so much. So it's ironical that, for example, you have to look to a country like Italy or France or, the UK for support when DRC itself has more resources than the entire Western Europe combined.
I like how everyone, and not just you, but most analysts are blaming the AU for failing to do a number of things. All this, the summit comes at a time where Africa, there are border disputes, displacement due to fighting. Central Africa Republic, not forgetting Somalia severed its ties with Kenya. Ethiopia and Sudan have border issues. Many people are questioning AU. Can they really tackle the continent's security challenge?
Now, given the kind of history we have, the answer is no. Until the organization gets to get what we call a structural kind of reorganization, whereby they have structures which are financed and empowered to take care of these problems. For example, you cannot talk about intervention in a conflict like in Ethiopia, for instance, when we don't have a military which can go there and do that. And then again, we have what we call internal issues in these countries, whereby, like, let's say in Kenya now, we're tackling our own problems. So when we send our president to participate in an AU, forum, he has to make contributions based on where he comes from. Most of these presidents don't want, intervention from an outside body. So they're always a bit skeptical when it comes to saying, let's send an AU force to your country to help you. Like the Ethiopian Prime Minister has insisted that, that is an internal problem and he does not want any kind of external, intervention. But in the long run, if we have the heads of state and government in Africa coming together to share this idea that we need to streamline our operations in these countries, then it will be very easy for the AU, number one, to be strengthened, and then number two, for it to be able to assist or help in resolving all these issues. But insofar as these countries have their own issues, they're going to actually lead up to now a confused and mediocre African Union. So it will be a talking club where these guys just meet, have a cup of tea, talk a lot of, let me say, nonsense, which does not lead to anything. And the continent will keep on suffering generation after generation. I think the only president, the only African leader who came up with a vision, which I think needs to be strengthened, is Gaddafi. God rest his soul in peace. And maybe that is why he was eliminated.
All right, briefly, even as we wind up. So then what needs to be done? And I want you to also comment on the fact that Somalia has missed its election deadline. They were supposed to go to election today, but this is not happening.
What needs to be done is going back to basics. You know, the basis on which the Organization of African Unity was founded, obviously by the independence leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, the likes of Mwalimu Nyerere, was to strengthen the continent, to champion Pan-African ideas, whereby Africa becomes independent instead of becoming a perpetual beggar. So we have to actually go back to basics. And that means we get leaders who are grounded in what we call a long-lasting and profitable ideology. So most of the time we elect leaders who do not even understand where they're in office. Now, on the Somali issue, Somalia is suffering. It has so many issues. And most of the time, you know, when they have challenges, just like South Sudan, it's Kenya which always intervenes to help. So since, of course, there was that kind of tension between Kenya and Somalia, it's been tough for them to deal with their own issues. And, you know, most of the time they get misled. Like last time when there was an issue over some blocks in the Indian Ocean, you know, they behaved like we've never supported them. So for their election to be successful, they have to look up to Kenya. For their, you know, diplomacy to be effective out there, they have to look up to Kenya. So they're going to have to reconsider the manner in which they conduct their business with Kenya. So because we've always been there for them.
But even AU has a role to play.
Say that again?
AU has a role to play when it comes to Somalia, even the dispute between Somalia and Kenya.
Well, in fact, you can expect Kenyan diplomacy to be more effective than the AU diplomacy in resolving the Kenya-Somalia issue, because Somalia has been, the AU has been unable to solve so many issues. And what we have is a leadership problem as far as the AU is concerned. And the path or the direction it has taken under the DRC president is a bit scary, because you can see it's actually missed the point. So if he's talking about climate change, he's talking about fighting against sexual violence, talking about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and he's also talking about a project that is inside his country. When the continent is suffering from COVID-19, we don't even have access to a vaccine that has been, you know, put out there in circulation in so many Western countries. It means he has missed the objective. That means he does not even get to remember that there is a conflict between Kenya and Somalia. It does not get to remember that inside Ethiopia there is turmoil. So that is how the AU has always become, has always been a useless organization. And I think we have to go back to...
Yes, we are out of time, but thank you very much, Abel Oyeyo, Regional Affairs commentator. His main take, going back to basics. That's what